There comes a moment in every powerful man's life when something inside him dies and something else is born. It is the moment he stops expecting the world to care. He no longer waits for sympathy. He no longer hopes someone will understand his pain, validate his struggle, or reward his virtue. In that moment, he sees reality clearly, a world that is indifferent, brutal, and self-serving. And instead of collapsing into despair, he becomes untouchable. Because once you accept that no one cares, you are free. Free to move without seeking approval. Free to act without begging for praise. Free to suffer without resentment. And that is when transformation begins. Machiavelli never believed in fairness. He believed in reality. And the reality is this: people care only when it benefits them to care. They care when your pain becomes their opportunity. They care when your success becomes their ladder. They care when your failure entertains them, but they do not care for you. Not deeply, not truly. If you build your life expecting them to, you are constructing a palace on a sinkhole, and sooner or later it will collapse. When it does, they will walk past your ruins without slowing down. The sooner you accept this truth, the sooner you can begin building something indestructible. A life that is not dependent on being cared for, but on being feared, respected, or necessary. It sounds cold, but it is not cruelty, it is clarity. The belief that people should care about you simply because you suffer is a child's fantasy. Power begins the moment you bury that fantasy. When you finally realize your pain is yours to carry and no one is coming to lift it off your shoulders, everything changes. You stop asking, "Why isn't anyone helping me?" and start asking, "What can I build from this silence?" In that shift, your posture changes. You stop broadcasting your wounds. You start becoming the kind of man whose silence makes others nervous. And that silence, that refusal to beg for care, becomes a fortress. This is the foundation of stoic power: to suffer without theatrics, to endure without applause, to bleed without an audience. Most people, even those who call themselves strong, are addicted to emotional performance. They dress their pain in poetry. They hint. They complain. They seek pity disguised as honesty. But the Machiavellian mind knows every display of suffering is a transaction. And the more you display, the cheaper you look. Every time you show your wounds, you lower your value. People stop seeing strength and instead see someone desperate to be seen. The moment that becomes obvious, you are finished. Power belongs to the one who stops performing, to the one who accepts that no one cares and builds anyway. This doesn't mean you must feel nothing. It means you must reveal nothing unless it serves your strategy. The world rewards strength, not need. And the fastest way to become strong is to act as though no one cares, even if some part of you still secretly hopes they might. Because when you act like no one cares, you stop waiting. You stop delaying your evolution. You stop leaning on invisible support and begin training your mind to walk through fire alone. That kind of man doesn't need applause. He doesn't need pity. He doesn't even need recognition. He becomes a force, and people feel that force the moment he enters a room. This is where power becomes magnetic. Ironically, the less you care about whether people care, the more they start to notice you. When you stop trying to be understood, you become intriguing. When you stop begging for loyalty, people chase your approval. Why? Because indifference, real grounded, earned indifference, is rare. Most men pretend not to care, but underneath they are seething. The Machiavellian man truly doesn't care. Not because he is broken, but because he understands the rules of the game. Everyone else is still hoping to be loved for free. They're hoping the world will hand them affection without cost. And that difference unsettles them. And what unsettles people commands them. Think about it. Most people shape their identities around being liked. They say what sounds good. They post their struggles online hoping someone will comment, "You're strong." They share quotes about resilience, but they melt under real pressure. They want the appearance of toughness, but the safety of sympathy. That isn't strength, it's decoration. True resilience is invisible. It's the man who walks past you with heavy scars and no need to explain them. It's the man who doesn't share his pain because his pain has become his weapon. That is the man people begin to fear, and then they follow. Machiavelli would say, stop advertising your hardship, use it. Every time you are tempted to complain, pause and remember, no one cares. Not deeply, not consistently. And that is not a tragedy, it is liberation. Because once you accept this truth, you move differently. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop justifying your existence. You stop asking forgiveness simply for being ambitious, aggressive, or unapologetically focused. Caring too much about being cared for is the softest form of slavery. Freedom begins when you let it go. And here lies the merge of two great philosophies, the calm of Stoicism and the strategy of Machiavelli. When no one cares, your losses become private, your growth becomes secret, your ambition becomes surgical. You build in silence, you endure in silence. And then one day you emerge and no one knows how you got there. While everyone else is busy broadcasting their struggles waiting for validation, you are becoming a ghost that moves through fire untouched. You don't need applause. You don't need pity. You don't even need company. What you need is silence, because silence is the teacher of truth. Power belongs to the man who doesn't beg for care. But don't think this shift will be easy. You will feel the temptation to reach out, to explain yourself, to seek connection. You will face moments of doubt, moments where your silence feels suffocating. Good. That means the old version of you is dying. Let it die. Let the part of you that needs to be seen wither. Let the part that rages when ignored grow quiet. Because underneath all that noise lies something terrifyingly powerful, the man who moves for himself. The man who rises not because someone lifted him, but because he dragged himself upward by sheer force of will. That is the man people remember. Not the one who cried the loudest, but the one who didn't flinch. The world doesn't care about your suffering, but it will care about what you become because of it. Here lies the paradox. If you use the truth of indifference as a reason to collapse, you'll fade into the background like countless others. But if you use it as a reason to sharpen yourself, to rise in silence, you transform into the kind of figure Machiavelli admired: untouchable, unpredictable, unforgettable. And once you stop seeking care, once you no longer need to be understood, helped, or held, you gain something far greater: influence. People want to be near you. They sense an energy they cannot explain, something they don't have. It is internal authority, the quiet confidence of a man who has already buried his need for sympathy. That kind of presence shifts the energy of a room. It makes the weak imitate you, even if they don't understand what they are copying. This is why Machiavelli wrote, for those who sought power, not pity. Because pity ends when moods change. But power, real, silent, indifferent power, remains. When you accept that no one cares, you are no longer dependent on the emotional weather of others. You stop begging for shelter and instead build a fortress out of stone. And from that fortress, you look out at the world not with hatred, but with clarity. You no longer seek revenge against those who ignored you. Instead, you thank them for their silence forced you to find your own. And in your silence, you finally found yourself. Once you cross that invisible line, once you truly accept that no one cares, you enter a state that few ever reach. The world itself becomes quieter. Not because there is less noise, but because you stop listening for applause. You stop scanning faces for approval. You stop editing your behavior to win affection. And in that silence, something else begins to emerge. You hear your own mind, unfiltered, unchained, sharper than it has ever been. Because you are no longer performing, you are building. This is when the transformation becomes irreversible. You no longer wake up asking, will they care today? Instead, you wake up with one question: what must be done? You begin to treat your suffering the way a sculptor treats stone, not as something to be displayed, but as raw material to be carved into form. Every betrayal, every rejection, every moment of invisibility becomes material. You don't cry over it, you chisel it. Because the man who accepts that no one cares stops wishing for a better world and starts forging one in his own image. And here's the part most people will never understand: once you stop needing the world, you begin commanding it. It sounds paradoxical, but it is brutally real. Dependence repels power. Independence attracts it. When people sense you are emotionally self-sufficient, they change. Their tone shifts. Their posture adjusts. They measure their words more carefully around you. Not because you shout, but because your silence is not desperate, it is composed. And that composure is dangerous. It means you are not bargaining for approval. It means you are operating on your own terms. And people fear those terms even when they admire them. Look back at history's strongest figures: rulers, thinkers, warriors, builders. The common thread wasn't that they were loved. It was that they didn't need to be. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while enduring personal tragedy, illness, and betrayal. Did he collapse into public despair? Did he beg for sympathy? No. He wrote to himself in silence. He reminded himself daily, no one is coming to save you. Be your own fortress. That is Stoic reality. And it is Machiavellian as well, not because it is cold, but because it is effective. Machiavelli knew that a man who expects care from the masses is already conquered. Wait, because the masses are fickle. Today they cheer your name. Tomorrow they demand your downfall. If your power depends on their affection, then your power is already borrowed. But if your strength comes from indifference to their affection, if you lead whether they cheer or jeer, then you are untouchable. And that is the only kind of power worth having. So when you feel abandoned, ignored, or misunderstood, recognize that you are standing at a crossroads. One path leads to resentment, the other leads to greatness. Most choose resentment. They sulk. They retreat. They waste years complaining about how unfair the world is, about how no one recognized their value. They drown themselves in bitterness. But the Machiavellian path is different. You see the same truth that no one cares, and instead of mourning it, you make it your foundation. You stop expecting the world to be fair. You start becoming someone who cannot be ignored. That shift begins with how you speak. Weak men complain about being overlooked. Strong men let results speak for them. You will never hear the truly powerful explain themselves unnecessarily. Why? Because they understand this simple principle. Attention given too freely is charity, and charity cheapens value. If someone doesn't recognize your worth, you do not convince them. You do not argue. You make yourself so rare, so effective, so dominant in your lane that they are forced to notice. Not because you begged for it, but because their survival now depends on your presence. This is the difference between a man who begs for care and a man who commands consequence. When you stop expecting care, you stop giving away pieces of yourself for free. You stop bleeding emotionally into every room you walk into. You stop announcing your wounds hoping someone will rescue you. Instead, you weaponize your pain. You turn heartbreak into discipline. You turn rejection into direction. You turn being ignored into becoming undeniable. Because once you realize that no one is coming, you become the one who arrives. People will feel this shift. It will make them uncomfortable. Not because you are aggressive, but because you are complete. Most people are open wounds, constantly leaking emotion, constantly begging someone to patch them up. When they meet someone who doesn't leak, who doesn't beg, who doesn't explain, they're thrown off. You are not like them. You are not here to be saved. You are here to take what you came for. That energy, that cold clarity is what makes you powerful. It's the same clarity that built empires, the same clarity that outlasts betrayal, the same clarity that doesn't blink when old allies turn cold. Because when you have accepted that care is not guaranteed, you stop measuring people by how they make you feel and start measuring them by how they act when no one is watching. That is where loyalty reveals itself. That is where strategy begins. When you no longer expect care from others, your perspective shifts. You stop chasing connection and start observing behavior. You notice who checks in when there is nothing in it for them. You notice who disappears the moment you stop giving. You see who only speaks your name when it's trending and who still whispers it when no one else is listening. You file all of this away not for revenge, but for clarity. Because power is not just about rising, it is also about knowing who can stand beside you without dragging you down. And that knowledge only comes when you stop needing everyone to care. Eventually your identity changes. You are no longer the one who was hurt or the one who was overlooked. That story dies. You become the one who made it anyway. And that new story rewrites everything. It gives your past meaning. It gives your pain a purpose. And it gives your enemies a problem they cannot solve. Because you didn't need a savior, you became something far more dangerous. A man who moves forward without applause, without permission, without needing to be understood. That is what terrifies people the most. Most men believe they are strong until no one claps, until no one checks in, until the room falls silent. Then they shrink. They crumble under the weight of being unseen. But the one who thrives in that silence, who keeps going, not despite the indifference, but because of it, that man becomes myth. He becomes the story whispered in corners. How did he survive that? How did he rise from that? Why didn't he break? And the answer is always the same, because he stopped expecting anyone to care. From that moment forward, he never waited again. He didn't become cold, he became calculated. He didn't become bitter, he became better. He didn't stop feeling, he stopped needing. And that shift turned him into a threat. Because when a man no longer seeks care, he stops being a burden. He stops being predictable. He stops being controlled. He becomes the one others depend on, the one who can walk away from anything without begging. And that is when you begin to win, not loudly, but quietly. Not temporarily, but permanently. Not conditionally, but irreversibly. All it takes is accepting that no one owes you a single drop of care. Not the world, not your friends, not even fate itself. You either build yourself from nothing or you let the silence bury you. At this stage, something fundamental shifts inside you. The craving for validation is replaced with the hunger for control. You are no longer in the business of being seen, you are in the business of becoming undeniable. And not in the loud theatrical way most people chase attention. No, you operate in the quiet, strategic way Machiavelli understood best. When you stop expecting anyone to care, you stop playing by their emotional rules. You stop asking permission to exist. Instead, you begin reshaping reality around your movement. One decision at a time, one silence at a time, one refusal to flinch at a time. This is how sovereignty is built. You become your own territory, no longer emotionally colonized by others, no longer waiting for the external world to assign value to you. You define your own value not because it feels good, but because it's the only way to survive with power. That shift turns your psychology into a fortress. And once your mind becomes a fortress, you don't just become harder to manipulate, you become impossible to move unless you've already decided to move. People don't understand how rare this is. Most walk around governed by invisible strings, the need to be loved, the fear of abandonment, the aching hope that someone will finally notice them. These strings pull on every choice they make. It's why they fold under pressure. It's why they betray their purpose for short-term affection. It's why they become pawns in games they don't even realize they're playing. But when you accept deeply without illusion that no one cares, you cut those strings. You act without needing applause. You walk away without needing closure. You work in silence and expect nothing in return but your own satisfaction. That kind of psychological sovereignty terrifies people because it means they cannot guilt you. They cannot tempt you. They cannot threaten you with the withdrawal of love, attention, or support. You've already buried the part of you that depended on those things. And now your movements become leaner, cleaner. No more wasted energy explaining yourself to those who don't listen. No more exhausting emotional transactions with people who will never understand what drives you. No more begging for trust. You don't ask for trust, you prove yourself, and those who don't see it are left behind. This isn't cruelty, it's precision, the strategic abandonment of dead weight, because now your mission matters more than your feelings. This is the critical turning point. Your purpose stops being emotional and becomes strategic. You don't work just to feel fulfilled, you work to conquer. You don't improve just to feel better, you improve to dominate. You don't rise just to be admired, you rise to become essential. That mindset is the dividing line between the weak and the world shaping. The weak want to be held, the powerful want to be irreplaceable. And when no one cares, the only path forward is to make yourself so competent, so unshakable, so dangerous to ignore, that even the indifferent must adjust themselves around your presence. You stop living for sympathy. You start living for leverage. And here's the most twisted, powerful paradox of all. Once you no longer need people to care about you, people start to care. Not because they've changed, but because you have. Your detachment becomes gravity. Your silence becomes status. Your refusal to chase makes others chase you. Because people are repelled by neediness, but drawn to indifference, especially when that indifference is earned, not faked. And make no mistake, there is a difference. Fake indifference is loud. It tries too hard. It pretends not to care while constantly checking if anyone noticed. Real indifference is invisible. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't signal. It simply moves forward with or without the audience. When you carry yourself like that, people begin to wonder, what does he know that I don't? Why is he so sure of himself? What did he go through to become like this? They sense you've suffered in silence, that you've walked through hell without writing poetry about the flames. And whether they love you or fear you, they cannot ignore you. That is the exact kind of power Machiavelli respected, the kind that doesn't ask for a throne, but makes people nervous when you enter the room, because they feel they might be in the presence of something unbreakable. This is what no one cares truly unlocks. Not bitterness, but backbone. You stop crying over what people failed to give you, and instead you weaponize what they could never take from you: your dignity, your focus, your momentum. And once those belong solely to you, your power compounds quietly, relentlessly. You stop talking about your moves, you start making them. You stop explaining your standards, you enforce them. You stop waiting for the right moment, you become the moment. And even then, no one will clap. Not at first, not when you need it, but by then it doesn't matter. You've already built your machinery in silence, without applause. The ones who succeed without support are the ones who never fall apart when support vanishes later. That's the secret no one talks about. The world gives applause only after you've proven you no longer need it. But those who depend on applause, they collapse the moment the cheers go silent. You won't. You've already lived in silence. You've built in shadows. You've starved your need to be loved. And in that starvation, you discovered your power. So when the world finally turns its eyes to you, when people finally ask how you survived, you won't need to explain. They'll see it in your eyes: the quiet storm, the refusal to die, the calm that only comes from walking through fire alone. Because the truth is simple: once you accept that no one cares, you stop needing rescue. You stop waiting to be saved. You become the storm they thought would break you, and now you are the storm that breaks them. By the time you reach this level of detachment, you are no longer driven by hope. You are driven by inevitability. You don't hope to be seen. You don't hope to be loved. You don't hope to be chosen. All of that was burned out of you in the furnace of silence. What emerged from that furnace was not a man hoping to belong in someone else's world, but a man building his own. A man who doesn't flinch when he is alone because he has walked so long without applause that silence now feels like home. This is where the Machiavellian mind eclipses the emotional mind completely. Most people are still negotiating with reality. They're trying to get the world to care, trying to get life to reward them for being good, loyal, or kind. But the world doesn't reward emotion, it rewards effectiveness. And when you finally abandon the delusion that being cared for is guaranteed, you stop negotiating. You start operating. It's a different energy entirely. Your actions no longer wobble under pressure. Your ambition no longer bends to loneliness. Your path no longer detours at rejection. You're no longer playing someone else's game. You're building your own and forcing others to play it. And the fewer people you expect to care, the more dangerous you become. Because now you're no longer slowed down by the emotional bureaucracy that governs most lives. You don't stop to explain. You don't pause to reassure. You don't hold hands through discomfort. You move, and the world either catches up or collapses in your absence. Some will call you emotionless, but it isn't emotionlessness, it's refinement, precision. You still feel, but you feel in solitude. And you use those feelings not to complain, but to engineer, to plan, to punish, to build something no one can ever take from you again. This is the most brutal, beautiful truth Machiavelli hinted at. You cannot make people care. You can only make them comply. That is the great divide. The weak chase emotional justice. The powerful chase results. And the faster you abandon the myth of emotional justice, the faster you seize real control over your life. Not everyone will support you. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone will care. So what does their care build? What does their sympathy protect? What does their understanding matter when you're bleeding out at the top of the mountain? Nothing. It sounds harsh because it is. But harshness isn't cruelty, it's honesty. The world does not run on feelings, it runs on power. And the first power is mastery over your own mind. Once you accept that care is a currency you cannot force others to spend, you stop begging for it. You build wealth in other forms: quiet power, ruthless patience, relentless discipline, and above all, emotional solitude. Solitude becomes your forge. Solitude becomes your compass. Solitude becomes your sanctuary, because in solitude you are no longer distracted by the need to be seen. And finally, you begin to see clearly. You see who is using you, who is testing your boundaries, who only claps when the crowd claps first. That clarity, that sword, is what Machiavelli was sharpening all along. And when you stop romanticizing loyalty from strangers, when you stop waiting to be noticed, you turn inward, not to hide, but to sharpen. And from that sharpening comes dominance. Because when the world sees someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't explain, doesn't depend, they orbit. They lean in, they whisper your name, and eventually the same people who once ignored you will offer the care they once withheld. But by then you won't need it. You already built without it. You already bled without it. You already became everything you needed in the dark. That is the Machiavellian truth. People only care once you've proven you don't need them to. And even then, their care is irrelevant. Because by then, you are no longer waiting. You are the one they wait for. Inevitable, unbreakable, untouchable.